The gunshots echoed through Terminal C while Sarah Mitchell turned another page of her paperback novel. Around her, passengers screamed and dove behind chairs as armed men in black tactical gear shouted commands in accented English. Glass shattered from the departure board as automatic weapons sprayed the ceiling. Yet Sarah remained seated in 14B, her coffee growing cold on the armrest. A mother clutched her crying toddler 3 seats away, staring at Sarah with wide eyes that seemed to ask how anyone could read during a terrorist attack. The lead gunman barked orders about securing all exits while his team herded travelers toward the center of the gate area. Sarah noted their positions without lifting her gaze from the page, counting 7 hostiles with professional-grade equipment and coordinated movement patterns. The businessman beside her whispered frantically into his phone until a terrorist ripped it away and smashed it against the wall. Sarah calmly bookmarked her place and set the novel in her lap. Her wedding ring caught the fluorescent lights as she folded her hands, appearing every bit the suburban mother traveling home from a business conference. The terrorists continued their systematic control of the terminal, unaware that the quiet woman in seat 14B was calculating sight lines, exit routes, and weapon distributions with the precision of someone who had done this before. The lead terrorist approached Sarah with his assault rifle raised, expecting the usual cowering and pleading. Instead, she looked up from her book with the mild annoyance of someone interrupted during a good chapter. Her gray eyes met his dark ones without a flicker of fear, and something in that steady gaze made him pause mid-stride. His confidence wavered as he studied her face more carefully. The scar along her left temple, barely visible beneath her auburn hair. The way she sat with perfect posture despite the chaos. Most tellingly, how her hands remained relaxed while every other passenger trembled with terror. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of operators who had walked through fire and emerged harder than steel. The terrorist leaned closer, speaking in rapid Arabic to his second-in-command. The other man's eyes widened, and he took an involuntary step backward. Sarah tilted her head slightly, understanding every word they exchanged about the woman who matched descriptions from classified intelligence briefings. The passengers around her noticed the shift immediately. How the armed men who had been so aggressive moments before now seemed uncertain, almost wary. Sarah closed her book with deliberate slowness and placed it on the seat beside her, never breaking eye contact with the terrorist leader. The simple gesture carried the weight of someone preparing for work rather than surrendering to fate. Word spread through the terrorist ranks like wildfire. The confident shouting that had filled the terminal minutes earlier dropped to hushed, urgent whispers as operatives exchanged glances and repositioned themselves. 3 men who had been advancing on other passengers suddenly retreated to defensive positions near the windows, their weapons now trained not on the crowd, but towards Sarah's general vicinity. The mother with the toddler watched in amazement as the same terrorists who had terrorized her family now seemed reluctant to approach the quiet woman in business attire. Other passengers began to notice the shift in dynamics, how the armed men kept stealing nervous glances at Sarah while maintaining their distance. An elderly man in a veteran's cap leaned forward, studying her with knowing eyes that recognized something familiar in her bearing. Sarah stood slowly, brushing invisible lint from her navy blazer with the casual precision of someone adjusting a uniform. The simple movement sent ripples of tension through the terrorist formation as they tracked her every gesture. She walked to the large windows overlooking the tarmac, her heels clicking against the polished floor with military cadence that made the lead terrorist's jaw tighten with recognition. From her new position, Sarah had clear sight lines to all 7 hostiles and 3 different exit routes. The passengers realized that their predicament had fundamentally changed, though none yet understood exactly who this woman was or why armed terrorists suddenly seemed afraid of her. Sarah began moving through the terminal with purpose, her path seemingly casual but strategically brilliant. She paused at the information kiosk to examine arrival schedules while positioning herself behind cover that offered protection from crossfire. The terrorists found themselves constantly adjusting their formation to compensate for her movements, no longer controlling the space, but reacting to her presence. She approached the frightened mother and toddler, speaking in calm, measured tones that carried authority despite the whispered volume. The woman's panic visibly decreased as Sarah gave her specific instructions about moving toward the emergency exits when the moment came. Other passengers watched this interaction, noticing how the armed men seemed reluctant to interrupt what appeared to be a simple conversation between travelers. The elderly veteran caught Sarah's eye and nodded with understanding. Without words, he began subtly encouraging other passengers to shift positions, creating natural barriers between civilians and the terrorist weapons. Sarah acknowledged his assistance with the slightest tilt of her head, the kind of nonverbal communication that spoke of shared military experience. From a duty-free shop, Sarah retrieved a small metal letter opener, palming it with practiced ease while appearing to browse postcards. The lead terrorist watched her every move, but found himself unable to justify stopping someone who was simply shopping. His operational control was slipping away as Sarah orchestrated the terminal like a chess master positioning pieces for an inevitable checkmate. The confrontation erupted when a terrorist moved to separate Sarah from the other passengers. In one fluid motion, she deflected his rifle barrel with her left forearm, while driving the letter opener into the pressure point beneath his collarbone with surgical precision. He dropped like a stone, his weapon clattering across the polished floor as he clutched his temporarily paralyzed arm. The remaining terrorists raised their weapons, but Sarah had already vanished behind a support pillar, using the terminal's architecture like a trained operator who understood angles of fire and cover positions. She emerged 3 seconds later with a fire extinguisher, spraying dense chemical foam that created instant concealment while she closed distance on the second gunman. Her movements were economical and devastating. A heel strike to the knee followed by an elbow to the solar plexus dropped the second terrorist before he could clear the foam from his eyes. She stripped his weapon with practiced efficiency, checking the magazine and chamber in one smooth motion that spoke of thousands of hours of repetition. The passengers stared in stunned silence as this suburban-looking woman demonstrated combat skills that belonged in special operations units. The elderly veteran smiled grimly, recognizing the precise techniques of someone trained by the very best. 3 terrorists remained standing, but their confidence had evaporated completely as they faced an opponent who moved like a ghost and struck like lightning. Sarah moved to the airport's emergency communication panel, her fingers dancing across the controls with the familiarity of someone who had studied every major transportation hub security systems. She established contact with the tactical response team outside, while simultaneously activating the terminal's evacuation protocols, her voice calm and professional as she provided precise intelligence about remaining hostile positions. The passengers watched in amazement as she coordinated their escape routes with military precision. She directed the mother and toddler towards Service Corridor B, knowing it led directly to the secure loading area where SWAT teams were positioning. The elderly veteran helped guide other civilians toward designated safe zones that Sarah identified through her knowledge of airport emergency procedures. Her communication with outside authorities revealed extensive familiarity with counterterrorism protocols. She provided tactical assessments using terminology that made the incident commander pause and ask for her credentials. Sarah's response was brief, but carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question during crisis situations. The remaining terrorists found themselves increasingly isolated as passengers disappeared through routes they hadn't known existed. Sarah had transformed their controlled environment into a tactical nightmare, with civilians evacuating through secure channels while she maintained overwatch with captured weapons. The lead terrorist realized he was no longer hunting sheep, but had stumbled into a wolf's den, with the wolf now dictating the terms of engagement. Sarah systematically dismantled the remaining terrorist operation with the methodical precision of a surgeon. She used the terminal's infrastructure against them, cutting power to specific sections to create darkness while she moved through maintenance corridors that appeared on no public maps. Each engagement lasted seconds, with terrorists discovering too late that their prey had become the predator. The third terrorist fell when Sarah dropped from an overhead ventilation grate, her descent timed perfectly to coincide with his patrol route. A blood choke rendered him unconscious in 4 seconds, his weapon secured before his body hit the ground. She moved like smoke through the terminal, appearing where least expected and vanishing before return fire could find its mark. Her fourth takedown demonstrated advanced psychological warfare as she used the airport's public address system to broadcast the terrorist leader's panicked radio communications. His authority crumbled as his remaining men heard their commander's voice crack with fear while describing an opponent who seemed to anticipate their every move. The fifth terrorist abandoned his position entirely when Sarah appeared behind him despite his certainty that all approaches were covered. Her knife work was swift and silent, leaving him zip-tied with his own restraints in a maintenance closet. 2 remained, but their cohesion had dissolved into desperate survival instincts as they faced an opponent who fought with skills that belonged in classified operational manuals. The terrorist leader's radio crackled with urgent transmissions from his handler, a voice demanding status updates that grew increasingly frantic as minutes passed without response from his eliminated operatives. Through intercepted communications, Sarah heard the word that made her smile grimly in the shadows. Falcon. They knew exactly who they were dealing with now, and the terror in the handler's voice confirmed her legendary status in intelligence circles. The remaining 2 terrorists huddled together near Gate 12, their previous confidence replaced by the desperate awareness that they faced someone whose reputation preceded her through the darkest corners of international operations. Whispered conversations revealed fragments of stories they had heard in training camps, tales of an American operator who could dismantle entire cells single-handedly. Sarah appeared at the far end of their corridor, walking openly now without concern for concealment. Her captured assault rifle hung casually at her side, while she approached with the measured pace of someone who had already won. The terrorists raised their weapons with shaking hands, knowing that their target's calm approach meant she held advantages they couldn't comprehend. Their handler's voice echoed through abandoned radios scattered across the terminal, frantically ordering retreat while confirming what everyone now understood. The quiet woman reading a paperback novel had been Falcon all along, the ghost operative whose mere presence meant their mission was already over. The final confrontation unfolded with Sarah holding all the tactical advantages while the last 2 terrorists found themselves cornered in the departure lounge where this had all began. She positioned herself between them and the few remaining civilians, her weapon trained with unwavering precision as she opened negotiations that sounded more like a briefing than a standoff. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding life-and-death situations as she offered terms that demonstrated intimate knowledge of their operational structure, their handlers, and their planned escape routes. The terrorists realized that Falcon had been tracking their cell long before they entered the terminal, turning their own mission into an elaborate trap. The lead terrorist made his final desperate play, threatening to detonate explosives that would bring down half the terminal. Sarah's response was a single precisely placed shot that severed the detonation wire before he could complete the motion, her marksmanship skills operating at a level that defied human limitations. The remaining operative dropped his weapon and surrendered, understanding that resistance against such overwhelming superiority was meaningless. Sarah maintained overwatch while zip-tying the survivors, her movements economical and professional as she secured the scene. Through the large windows, tactical teams were finally advancing across the tarmac, but the threat had been neutralized by a single operator who had turned a terrorist takeover into a masterclass in counterterrorism operations. The SWAT team commander who breached the terminal doors stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Sarah securing the final prisoner with professional restraints. His tactical gear bore the insignia of elite federal response units, yet he approached her with a deference reserved for superior officers. The way he addressed her confirmed what the surviving passengers had witnessed but couldn't fully comprehend. Sarah Mitchell was not her real name, merely cover identity for one of the most classified operatives in American intelligence. Falcon had been hunting this particular terrorist cell for 18 months, tracking their movements across 3 continents before they made the mistake of choosing her flight for their dramatic statement. Her presence in Terminal C had never been coincidence. The elderly veteran watched with knowing satisfaction as federal agents treated Sarah like visiting royalty, their briefings delivered in hushed tones that spoke of clearance levels beyond civilian imagination. Her paperback novel remained on Seat 14B, a prop so perfectly mundane that no one had questioned the woman who used reading time to memorize terrorist positions and plan their systematic destruction. As body bags were loaded and survivors processed, the truth emerged in fragments. The quiet businesswoman had been Sarah Chun, decorated special operations veteran whose transition to intelligence work had created legends whispered in military circles worldwide. Her retirement had been strategic fiction, her civilian identity maintained for operations exactly like this one. The terminal filled with federal agents and military personnel who treated Sarah with a reverence that left rescued passengers speechless. A 3-star general arrived by helicopter specifically to debrief Falcon, his entrance causing every uniformed person in the area to snap to attention. The mother with the toddler watched in amazement as this quiet woman who had saved their lives received salutes from officers whose ranks she had never imagined. Evidence recovery revealed the scope of the terrorist plot that Sarah had single-handedly dismantled. Intelligence gathered from captured operatives exposed a network planning coordinated attacks across 12 major airports, with Terminal C serving as their proof-of-concept operation. Her intervention had prevented a catastrophe that would have paralyzed international travel for months. The passengers who had witnessed her transformation from suburban traveler to legendary operative found themselves debriefed by agents who emphasized the classified nature of what they had experienced. Their statements would be sealed, their rescue attributed to rapid response teams, rather than a single operator whose existence remained officially denied. Sarah finally retrieved her paperback novel from Seat 14B, smoothing the dog-eared pages while federal marshals prepared her secure transport. The elderly veteran approached with a knowing smile, his own military service recognizing the quiet professionalism of someone who had turned catastrophe into routine through skills earned in places that appeared on no maps. Sarah walked toward the secure exit with the same calm stride that had first puzzled the terrorists, her transformation complete in the eyes of everyone who had witnessed her legendary performance. The mother with the toddler called out her thanks, receiving a gentle nod from the woman who had become their guardian angel through skills most people only imagined existed. Airport personnel would speak of this day in hushed reverence for decades to come, how a terrorist takeover had been neutralized not by tactical teams or negotiators, but by a passenger with a paperback novel who turned out to be the most dangerous person in the terminal. Security footage would be classified, but the stories would live forever in whispered conversations among those who understood what they had witnessed. The general's final words to Sarah carried the weight of institutional gratitude as he personally escorted Falcon to her transport. Her cover identity as Sarah Mitchell would be retired, her civilian life restored after this operation's completion, but her legend would endure in classified briefings and training scenarios studied by the next generation of operators. As her vehicle disappeared into the secure perimeter, the rescued passengers realized they had been saved by someone whose name would never appear in news reports, whose actions would remain officially invisible, but whose calm presence in their darkest hour had meant the difference between tragedy and triumph. Have you ever stayed calm when everyone around you panicked? Share your story of keeping your head when others lost theirs.